Today, we spend the hour with the legendary independent filmmaker and author John Sayles. Over the past 3 decades, he's directed 17 feature films, including The Return of the Seacaucus Seven, Matewan, Lone Star, and 8 Men Out. He's also a successful script doctor, rewriting the scripts of many Hollywood blockbusters, including Apollo 13. John Sayles has often used his films to tackle pressing political issues, as well as themes of race, class, labor, and sexuality. His newest film, Amigo, which opens in August, is set in the Philippines during the U.S. occupation. John Sayles is also a celebrated author, a winner of the O. Henry Award. He's just published his first novel in 20 years. It's called A Moment in the Sun. It's a sprawling work which takes the turn of the 20th century in its sights, from a white racist coup in Wilmington, North Carolina, to the first stirrings of the motion picture industry, to the bloody dawn of U.S. interventionism in Cuba and the Philippines. We sat down on Wednesday before John Sayles left for the Philippines, and I asked him about his epic historical novel, A Moment in the Sun.
Yeah, I got sucked into this. I was doing research for my last novel, Los Gusanos, and I kept coming across this phrase, the Philippine insurrection, or the Philippine-American War. And I said, okay, I'm 30-something years old. How come I've never heard of this? Which got me suspicious. You know, usually when we win a war, and we won that war, we celebrate it. And how come, you know, Amigo is probably going to be the 3rd movie ever made in the United States about the Philippine-American War? How come there are no novels about it? How come it's not in our history books? And then asking my Philippine and Philippine-American friends what they knew about it, they said, well, we kind of know about it, but it was not taught in our schools. You know, how is something that's like not teaching the American Revolution in American schools? You know, how does a piece of history where probably 1 million Filipinos died get plowed under like that, and why? So that's some of what the story is. And I found the other big thing that was happening in the United States at the time was the last nail in the coffin of Reconstruction was being nailed in North Carolina, the last of the, you know, former Confederate states, to bring in the Jim Crow laws, to disenfranchise their black voters, and the two were linked. And so,
explain how they're linked.
Well, I think they're just linked by race, which is that whenever you look into anything historical, you have to think of what's the worldview of the people who are, you know, living then, who are the actors in the play. And the worldview then was an extremely racist one, and not just from the yellow journalists and, you know, the rednecks or whatever, but you know, college professors and presidents were spouting, you know, eugenics and other kind of racial theories that basically gave them a you know, kind of green light to go and do whatever they wanted in the world, as long as it wasn't to white people.
You know, we have just been talking about Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. President Obama has made the first presidential visit in half a century, mm-hmm. Puerto Rico, which the key moment when the U.S. occupied 1898, mm-hmm. which talking about the Philippines, talking about Cuba. Mm-hmm. Now, most people aren't familiar with this history, and mm-hmm. you chose the dawn of the 20th century as your backdrop. So talk about the connection between the Philippines and Cuba.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the interesting thing for me was that there was this switch in the mentality and the self-image of Americans. We had certainly done things that were imperialistic before. We had, you know, defeated and taken over the lands of Indian nations. We had, you know, taken a big chunk of northern Mexico, but we didn't think of ourselves or want to think of ourselves as imperialists. In a few-month period from the time that the United States defeated the Spanish in Cuba, we went from saying, okay, we're the lovers of liberty, we're here to liberate these people from, you know, oppression, from imperialism, to, oh, let's not leave the Philippines. And it was I think, a combination of opportunism and ignorance. There was a thing called the Teller Amendment that when we were discussing in Congress whether to fight the Spanish and kick them out of Cuba. And they were doing horrendous things in Cuba. They were doing, concentration camps, were literally called concentration camps there. People were being starved. People were being murdered in Cuba. When we were debating whether we were going to actually have this war with Spain, a congressman named Teller said, well, this isn't because you want to take over Cuba as a territory or a state and exploit it. And the expansionists said, oh, no, this is just pro bono. This is out of the, because we love liberty. And he said, well, put it in writing. So the Teller Amendment was written. But because of ignorance, people didn't also kind of know that Spain was sitting in Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. So when we won so quickly the war in Cuba, the expansionists said, well, those places also are being controlled by the Spaniards. We could kick them out of there, and they're not covered by the amendment. So all of a sudden there was this kind of second wave of that war. And what's interesting, some of the characters in my book, In a Moment in the Sun, end up being people who probably for their various reasons volunteered for the war, because it was not a time when we had a big standing army. So more than half of the people who fought in those wars were volunteers to liberate the Cuban people, and instead found themselves in the Philippines killing Filipinos to take over the Philippines as an American territory.
I want to